Our intro music is provided by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com.
For the best in paranormal talk radio, you're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio with Gary.
Well, here I am. Boy, the weather down here at the harbor today is in the 90s. I had my motorcycle all set up to go riding today, and then I looked outside, got to it. Boy, don't ever buy a black motorcycle, because I tell you, when it's hot and the sun is out, you know what? That is the worst thing. Get your butt on. I got on the seat, and nope, that's too hot. So I decided to do other things. Tonight, we got as our guest, H0st, who is also a paranormal talk show host. And then I have the paranormal lawyer, which is our Sunday host, Michael W. Hall, on Night Dreams Talk Radio. Hi, everybody.
Hey
Gary. Well, I already know the weather over in your area, Michael, but how's your weather over there in your state, Chris?
Ohio is warm.
Okay. Well, warm could be, some people warm and hot is in the 70s. Hot to me is anything in the 80s. When it gets up to the 90s, that's too hot.
It can be, yeah. It's rough. It's kind of humid here, so you have to watch it during the day more than anything else. Somewhere between 2 and 4 o'clock usually is the hottest time. After 4, it tends to cool back down a little bit. So I stay in my little dungeon during those hours and get my work done.
Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go buy a spray bottle tomorrow and fill it with water, and I'm going to just spray myself on in this room, because when it gets over 100 and some degrees in here, I might lose some weight while I'm sitting in here.
Yeah, I'd put some ice cubes in there, Gary. That would be really nice to cool you down.
Oh, that would do
a
it.
little tub of dry ice in the corner.
Well, but of course, you know what I find interesting is after about an hour into the show, depending on how hot it is, I can start hallucinating, which makes the show even more better. It makes it good. Anyway, so hey, Chris, why don't you tell the listenership what you do for a living and about your talk show and how often it's on and what time of the day it's on?
Well, what I do for a living in my day job is actually marketing. I work with marketing and medical clinics nationwide, so it keeps me pretty busy. But I also spend time at universities. I've been doing the paranormal for 23 years now. I've had the great privilege of working with a lot of college professors, a lot of people early into the science, a lot of things you don't see on the average ghost hunter, I guess you could say. I've had the privilege of being around and working with and seeing. So I still talk and do speeches at some of the conferences and spend some time with some of the scientists and more in-depth people on my journey, so to speak. And I wanted to bring that to radio, so I created Paranormal Truth and Reality about 5 years ago now. It's on BBS Radio, digital radio station, www.bbs.com. That's one of the largest digital radio stations, one of the oldest, actually, that's been out there. They're in California. And then I dubbed that over to the AM stations here in Ohio when I can as well. And what we do on Paranormal Truth and Reality is we cover mostly what it states. We cover the reality of the paranormal as opposed to what a lot of people are used to talking about. Though I have my ghost hunters that come on, and I have my celebrities that come on, obviously, and we talk about it. We tend to get more into the science and reality and discussions about what is and what isn't. And I like to call it the more controversial issues without being controversial, I guess you could say. Because we don't go poking fun, we don't cause issues. We just kind of break it down to the exact science, the history and stories involved, and how they came up with things, what's been determined, what hasn't been determined, and really bring back the study to a world that has lost that reality.
Well, you are so right. I started my career in the mid-'70s, and I started out with one radio station that they wanted to do a talk show. And I said, okay, well, I just got out of broadcasting training. I mean, I I don't really know how to do a talk show. And they said, well, we want to do a talk show. And I said, okay, do you want to make it political? And they go, no, there's a cult in our area. Why don't you make it like paranormal? And I started there in the 70s doing paranormal. But I will say something, in the last 10 years, the paranormal has opened up so much. But on the other end of it, there are so many people who do paranormal shows on the internet that it really kind of ruffles my feathers, as you might say, because one, they don't know what they're talking about is number one, and they do it so unprofessional where they use the F word every other word, and they don't realize when they're doing the show, they're literally damaging the paranormal because the way they run their show. And I don't know if you have noticed that, but I feel like paranormal.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, I feel paranormal should be, a show like, how can I say it? A good friend of mine or a good acquaintance of mine. I wasn't on his top 10 friend list, but was Art Bell. And he's the one back about a year ago who told me, hey, you're retired. Get back into radio and do a talk show on the internet. Forget about terrestrial radio. Stay with the internet. And boy, I jumped on it, and that's where that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, professionalism has tended to drop with a lot of digital radio stations. They cause a lot of drama. They sling a lot of ridiculous stuff. And I mean, I like to keep it very professional on Paranormal Truth and Reality. We talk about the facts. We have a good conversation. And we keep it very professional in the way we do it. I mean, I'm old school myself, so I'm used to that anyway. I mean, you know how it is when you got into radio broadcasting, which I did do for a short period of time, though it wasn't in the paranormal. It was more in the marketing and business world on FM and AM for a little while. We had a lot of regulations. I mean, you had to really watch what you said. You had to really watch what your guests said. You would have the producer out there or a switchboard operator that would cut the guy off if he did something wrong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you had a lot of regulations back then.
Oh, yeah. I remember getting, fired at one radio station, the only one I was ever fired from. And I'm not going to go into that story, but, to top it off, about 3 weeks later, besides the station getting fined, I got a fine by the FCC, for, using the wrong language. And I didn't even realize it was going over the air. I blamed that on my engineer at the radio station, didn't shut the mic off. And that was, one time. And then the other time, I just, I don't know. I really love radio. But I do like the freedom of internet radio. It just takes a long time to build up a listenership. It's taken me a long time to get the listenership we have. But, I enjoy the guests. And, one thing I do on my show is when I bring a guest on, I treat them with the most respect I can. And if they want to go down a rabbit hole, I'll let them go down a rabbit hole. That's one thing that me and Art Bell had a long talk about before I decided to get back into broadcasting because I was retired. I think paranormal should be one, informative, like you mentioned, educational, and entertainment, and those three things.
It's a fine line to actually tread sometimes because there are two different worlds in the paranormal. 20 years ago, the paranormal was all about the study. You'd find a lot of scientists that were doing it in their part-time. You'd find a lot of grants and research that was given to people so that you could do things. I mean, when I first got into the paranormal, there were a lot of people way over my head. In fact, I remember when I first went out with the International Paranormal Research Society, which doesn't even exist anymore, they were mostly college individuals that were doing it part-time as a part of the association outside of teaching and schooling and so forth. So I remember telling them the first time I was out in the field, they're setting up all this technical equipment and doing all this stuff at a location which wasn't theoretically a haunted location. It was a geological study that had other occurrences that related to paranormal and haunted situations. And they were interviewing residential people, and they were talking about all this equipment. I'm like, guys, you're way over my head here. I don't understand a word you're saying. So they said, okay, here's a notepad. Here's a list of questions. Go start talking to people. Hit record. Okay, I can do that. I mean, back then it was a little bit different than now. Yeah, you had your crackpots and you had your weirdos and you had your strange events, But now it's been segmented to where there's two realities to the paranormal. You still have the study, but you don't get a chance to talk to very many people in those study because they don't spend time on social media. They do still have careers. They do still spend part-time or look for grants to do this stuff. And then you have what I like to call the thrill seeker or the hunt seekers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I never downtread it. In fact, some people have made some wonderful TV shows out of doing it. They're very successful at it. I've met many, many of them, and they're great people. But it's two different realities. One doesn't understand the science. One does understand the science. And a lot of times their heads kind of clash when they shouldn't.
Well, boy, I found that out. I had a ghost hunting group about 4 or 5 months ago on my show. And, they were, emailing me every day they want to be on. They wanted to be on. And finally, I talked to one of them, and it sounded like they knew what they were talking about. So I brought them on the show. Well, it turned out, the only experience they had was going to a person's house one time and spending an hour or two trying to debunk if the house was haunted or not. But they would get together. They would get together like every week and go have a beer. Well, it was quite apparent they were a social group, not really a ghost hunter group, number one. Number two, they kept talking about on the show that they want to go and get on a cable network with their idea of ghost hunting. And after about an hour of them being on my show, I just had to say, I'm sorry, I can't do the interview any longer. I mean, you guys aren't real. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I take everything as a grain of salt. With my guest. But there's the point where you just can't do it anymore.
I run into that a lot. I stay politically correct because everybody's welcome to have their own opinions, and everybody has their own beliefs, and that's great. I support that. I listen to that. I support it on my show if they want to discuss that because some beliefs, even though I don't believe in them, are fascinating to talk to people about. And you can always learn something different from each person. But it's tough to have that thin line sometimes, especially with what you're talking about. I at the mid to my career, I had decided I wanted to get back to the paranormal community, so I started a company called Generation Truth, which we're working on right now. And it's going through the growing pains of any business and any growth, especially with the production agency, because it's a whole new handful, even though I knew going in what production was about and I knew going in what media and television was about. You still have to build it properly, get the right crew, you lose people, and so forth. The one thing that we started out doing was we were going to tag along and follow teams. And we were going to tell the experiences of those teams and those stories. Great concept. A lot of networks were interested in us getting the first 3 or 4 out. What I did learn is there's a lot of people like what you just mentioned. It sounds nice and dandy to say that you have a paranormal team, but when you're out there filming them, you realize the reality that everybody wants a TV show. But what they don't understand is it's not that easy. You can create a YouTube channel if you want to. You can get 4,000 or 5,000 followers. Some people have 15,000 followers. But good luck getting the television show because 99.9% of the time you still have to produce your first 5 to 6 episodes, including the pilot episode. You have to hand it off to a production company. They have to like it. Then they have to pitch it. And they only get less than 1% of those shows to ever be interested in running the pilot on TV.
Yeah, and I find a lot of those, especially ghost hunting groups, and I guess there's so many of them. I didn't even